Okay, so Nietzsche, absolutely fantastic philosopher, one of the most famous, one of the guys that people are most interested in, and one of my favorites as well. Nietzsche was a German philosopher, lived in the 19th century, sort of towards the second half, towards the end of it, and he follows in the footsteps of Schopenhauer because he was a big fan of Schopenhauer. So if you've seen the Schopenhauer video, then that's great. But if you're watching this video, maybe you should go back and watch the Schopenhauer one first, and then come back to this. One of the things about Nietzsche that's quite interesting is that lots of different people have sort of claimed to be influenced by him, and they sort of say that their ideas are like his ideas, and they try to use what Nietzsche said to sort of make themselves look clever and sort of justify their ideas. It's very common now that a lot of people say, well, I said this and Nietzsche said that, which is like what I'm saying. And but usually they kind of misinterpreted Nietzsche, or they got something wrong about him, or they don't really understand him properly. And some people as well, they think Nietzsche was a cunt because either they think what he said was bad, or they've kind of misunderstood what he said and they think it's worse than what it is. Right. So very famously, the Nazis, Hitler and all those fucking cunts, they actually used Nietzsche and they tried to sort of make him their philosopher. He was dead by then, Nietzsche, by the way. He was dead before the Nazis came in. But when the Nazis came in and were killing all the Jewish people and all that, they kind of said, oh, this is all in Nietzsche. Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, said all this stuff, and we're doing that like what he said. But they were actually completely wrong. And if Nietzsche knew about these cunts, he would have been against them. He would definitely not have liked Hitler and all those fuckers. He would have been right against them. And the stuff they were doing was actually kind of against what Nietzsche was about, really. So anyone who says, "Oh, Nietzsche's a cunt and a Nazi thinker," he wasn't a cunt and a Nazi thinker. He wasn't around with the Nazis, and the Nazis just misinterpreted and corrupted everything that he'd said to make it suit them, which is really unfair, and horrible. And Nietzsche had a sister who lived longer than him, and she was around when the Nazis came in, and she liked the Nazis, and she helped them to sort of misuse her dead brother's name and work and all that. Nietzsche thought his sister was a fucking bitch when she was alive, and he was right. Anyway, so let's get into it. So Nietzsche's a proper philosopher of the sort of pure stuff. He's not really a political philosopher or political thinker. He doesn't have much to say about all that stuff. He does sometimes say that he thinks socialism's bollocks or whatever, but he's not really into that sort of thing. So remember that Schopenhauer had come up with this idea about will, and that there's will in everything, and the world is will and representation. Representation meaning that the experience that we all have of the world and how the world sort of exists to us as how we think and how we feel and what we see and everything. But will being what drives the world and makes everything work. So everything in the world is based on wanting things and wanting to do things, or wanting to be things, or wanting to have things, or needing, like I need to go for a shit, or the whatever. But the will is this big thing. The will is the most important thing in the world, and it makes things work, and it makes everything do what it does, and it makes the trees grow out of the ground and everything else. And the will is the thing, and it's the sort of heart and beating heart of the world, and it's the engine of the world, and it drives the world, and it is the real world. The real world, if it's anything, if the world is anything, and if there's anything behind the world, then it's the will. And remember that Schopenhauer had said that this will, when it's in us, it exists. When it's in us, it exists for us as suffering, and it's shit, and we're all a bit pissed off, and we're all suffering because of the will, and you can't really escape from the will. And he called it the will to survive, or the will to exist, but he usually just called it the will. So that was what Schopenhauer said. And now Nietzsche was interested in everything that Schopenhauer said, and he read all his books and that. And Nietzsche had some different ideas. Now, Schopenhauer had been one of those kinds of philosophers that builds a system, that writes a sort of a structured system and builds it and says, this is what I think and this is how the world works. And he builds up like a picture of the world, like a theory that says how it works and everything. Whereas Nietzsche didn't quite write like that, in the sense of writing sort of like a book of how the world works. Nietzsche wrote all these different books and things, and he used allegory a lot, which is when you sort of like writing a poem kind of a thing, where things mean things, but he doesn't outright say what he's talking about. He writes more like a poet, or he writes more like someone who writes a play or a novel or something, you know, rather than like an academic style like other philosophers. So he can be quite hard to understand because he doesn't write in this sort of academic way of writing. He writes in a kind of like using myths and legends and telling stories, and then you have to interpret the stories and the legends and the myths that he's making to work out what he's on about. Although sometimes he does sometimes come right out and say exactly what he means without covering it in all this stuff. But anyway, when you do read Nietzsche, it's quite nice to read. It's fun, it's interesting. You think, what the fuck's he talking about? I don't know what he's talking about, but it sounds fucking good, you know. Anyway, what did he write about? He wrote about the will, and he wrote about morality, you know, what's good and bad in the world, and how do you be good and how do you be bad, and what does it mean if someone's being a cunt or if someone's being a good boy, and what's it all about, and how should we behave as people, and what do we like about the world, and all the belief systems and things that people have in the world, what's good about them and what's bad about them, and you know, can we change it and make everything a bit better? Now Nietzsche comes up with this will idea, but he changes it a bit, and he says that it's the will to power. It's not the will to exist, it's the will to power. And he says that everybody, really what they should be doing is sort of trying to improve themselves and try to sort of be successful in life by doing whatever it is that they're doing, but doing it well and getting better at it and being good and sort of being a success in life, you know, like if you're a footballer and a professional footballer, then you want to be the best footballer and you want to win, you know, and be a good player on the team, and you want to do well for yourself, you know, and be really good. So you want to kind of perfect yourself and be the best that you can at football, and that's the will to power. That's you trying to be good and be better. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to sort of fuck over other people, but it means that you've got to try to be the best at what you're doing, and you're doing something for a purpose, and the purpose isn't just to stay alive. The purpose is to achieve something and to become something, you know, to be something in the world, to be someone, and that it's nothing to do with dicking over people or fucking people over, you know. It's nothing to do with that, really. Sometimes it might involve that, you know. It might involve winning over other people, it might involve fucking people over, but that's not the point of it. The point of it is that you're being the best you can at something, and you're improving, and you're, you know, becoming successful in the thing that you're trying to do, which differs from Schopenhauer, because Schopenhauer is like, well, that's just what you've got to do to live, is just to do what you need to do, and you're just trying not to be hungry, or you're trying to sort of relieve yourself, you know, by taking a shit, and it's nothing to do with achieving things. But for Nietzsche, it's all about achieving things, and you're trying to make yourself better than you would be if you just sort of let yourself just do whatever you just needed to do and not what you wanted to do. So the will to power for Nietzsche, that's like a really good thing, because what the will to power does is it doesn't just make everything work and tick along normally. It makes people become successful. It makes people become great, you know, and Nietzsche has this word he calls the Superman, or the Übermensch in German, but in English it's translated to Superman. Not the same guy that flies around and stuff from space, not him, but the same word, the Superman. And the Superman is someone who doesn't have to be a man, it could be a woman, but we won't talk about women with Nietzsche because he said some bad things about them, but we'll forget about that. Schopenhauer also was slagging off women, but we won't talk about that because that will make you think that they're just a pair of cunts, and it will make you not think about what they were talking about in philosophy, which is actually quite good stuff. Anyway, well, Nietzsche thought, well, you become the Superman. You become the Superman when you get really, really good or super at what you're doing, and you become like awesome at doing that thing, and then you become one of the big famous people that, you know, like Bill Gates, for example. You know, he's a Superman because he's done really well, and he's changed the world, and he's actually made the world a bit better by being awesome and helping other people by being great and being successful, and he's made his mark on the world, and he's made a place for himself in the world, and he's not just some random cunt that no one gives a shit about. He's this fucking dude who's been really successful and been the best he can at what he was doing, and been a success, you know. And Muhammad Ali, you know, he was the boxer, and you know, he was another one that you could say he was a Superman because he fucking excelled at what he was doing and got to the point where he was the fucking best at that, and you know, not just some random cunt. So the Superman for Nietzsche, he's the person who does really well and is successful, so much so that other people see them as successful and sort of, you know, whereas like most people are just random cunts, and most people don't actually do that well, you know, or nobody notices them or whatever, you know. And what Nietzsche thinks is that the system of morality, especially the Christian morality and what Jesus said and stuff in the Bible, a lot of that is about stopping people from being these great people and keeping people down, and making it all about being a shitty random cunt and being poor and being a slave and not doing anything for yourself. And in the Bible, like in the New Testament, there's loads of stuff about how blessed are the weak, you know, and the weak will inherit the world, and a rich man can't get into heaven, and stuff like that, and love your enemy and all this stuff, and sort of turn the other cheek and be peaceful and all these things. And Nietzsche thinks this is all a lot of fucking bollocks. And he's got a big beef with Christianity. He thinks that's all a pile of shit. And he thinks it's a pile of shit because he thinks it's all about making people into shit people, not making the best for themselves and making them not want to sort of excel and be successful. It's about saying, well, if you're not successful, then oh, you're going to be rewarded in heaven, you know, and if you're successful, then you're going to be fucked over and go to hell, you know, and this kind of thing. So Nietzsche's against all that, and he says that's all a bunch of arse. We'll come back to that later. Anyway, Nietzsche thinks that people should really try to be the best they possibly can at whatever it is that they're doing, and that's the will to power. Now, what people say about that is people confuse that, and they think that he means that some people are better than others, and that they're naturally superior or naturally inferior, and that naturally superior ones should be superior, and that like. And they say things like that he thinks that Jewish people are bad and that they're not as good as German people or stuff. But that's all bollocks. He didn't say any of that. All he was saying was about people being successful and people trying hard and being good at what they do. Now, it might be the case that some people might be better at stuff than others, but just because they're better at stuff than others doesn't mean that they shouldn't be allowed. They shouldn't be allowed to be good at what they're doing and be better than others, you know. Whereas, like, some people might say we don't want people being better than others because it's unfair, you know. But Nietzsche says, well, some people might be better than others at some things because they're good at them and they try hard and they make themselves the best at them, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know. If someone's the best at something, then that's good, you know. Like Ariana Grande, who I like, is like a great singer and she's really successful, and she's got loads of money and she's really famous and everything, but that's because she's successful and she's done really well and she's got a nice voice or whatever, and she's pretty or whatever, and you shouldn't just be jealous of her and go, oh, I want her to be, you know, working in Tesco, you know, because she shouldn't be working in Tesco. She should be doing what she's doing, which is being famous and everything. People like listening to her music and like looking at her, or whatever it is, you know, or whatever it is, some other cunt, you know, that's successful. it's a good thing that they're being successful, and we wouldn't want to bring them down and put them in some other situation where they're just, not doing as well, just because we're jealous of them, and what Nietzsche thinks about Christianity and about a lot of the way people think about ethics and morality is a lot of people, it's a lot of jealousy, just because you're in the shit and you're not having a good time and you're not being very successful yourself, that's no reason to sort of think that it's wrong for other people to be successful. Yes, okay, you can say and argue and say, well, some things are not fair in society and some things aren't fair and not everybody has the same opportunities to be the best they can. But that's kind of beside the point for Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is saying that really being jealous of people and wanting everyone to be on the same level, just because you're not very good at something, then that's bollocks, and that people should actually be good and do what they want to do and be successful. And if they're better than you at it, then so be it, And that's that. He's not saying that there's some sort of genetics or anything involved, or anything like that. He's saying, anyway. So, there are winners and losers in life, maybe you could say, which sounds a bit cuntish, but I mean, everyone can at least sort of try harder, and anyway, so he's against everyone being the same and stuff, and he's in favor of people being good at stuff and being successful, being great. And he thought that Napoleon Bonaparte was an example of someone who was a Superman, even though, to be honest, he fucking lost, but anyway. Yeah. So that's one of the most important things about Nietzsche, and that's the will to power. And it's also him calling Christianity a slave morality, because he said it's all about keeping people, making the poorest and the shittest of us sort of what is supposed to be the best, whereas what is the best for Nietzsche is people who are good at stuff and do well. There's nothing moral about being poor and shit. It's better to be good and successful. And if you think that other people being good and successful is shit, then it's because you're jealous of them, and that's not a good thing. So you can sort of see how that can be misinterpreted by people who just want to be cunts and want to say that it's all right to be a cunt. But he wasn't saying that it's all right to be a cunt. He was saying that being good at stuff and successful is great, and we shouldn't stop people from doing that. Yeah. Now, Nietzsche also wrote about morality in another way, and he wrote this book called The Geniality of Morality, which means sort of where does moral thoughts come from? Why do we have these ideas about right and wrong and good and bad and stuff like that? Why do we think that you're a cunt if you do this, but you're a good person if you do that? Where does all this come from? And Nietzsche doesn't think that it's sort of a fact that good and bad is facts. He thinks that good and bad, or good and evil, as he calls it, is kind of something that's developed out of people deciding what's good and bad, and it has nothing to do with any sort of fact of the matter of good and bad. So he's kind of like a bit of a relativist almost when it comes to morality. Remember that Kant had been a realist, and he had this categorical imperative thing, Kant, where he said that you've got to fucking imagine a universal law when you do some shit, and then you can decide if it's right or wrong, but that it's a fact that it's right or it's wrong. But Nietzsche kind of thought that right and wrong and good and bad were not really anything to do with any sort of abstract reality or logic or anything. He thought they were sort of social conventions, and that people had developed these ideas about good and bad and right and wrong and ethics and all that sort of as part of human culture, and society and stuff. And anyway, he gave an explanation of why he thought that good and bad existed. He said that back in the days when people started communicating with each other, it got so that people started exchanging things, swapping things for other things. So this was the beginnings of business and exchange. So like now, like now you buy something, you give someone £10 and they give you a burger and chips, or a book, or you give someone 25 quid and they give you a blowjob, or whatever it is, and they there's a value exchange of value, and the idea is that the one thing is equivalent to the other. So if I do this for you, you should do this for me. I give you the 10 quid and you give me the burger and chips. And if I don't give you the burger and chips, then that's not fucking right, and that's not fair, and that's not, you know what I mean? So, and this system of things being not right or not fair because you're not getting the right sort of deal, or the idea about it being fair and it being right because you're giving the 10 quid and they're giving you the burger and chips or whatever. This develops and develops and develops into other things, so that we think the same way about everything in the world, the same way that we do about buying something or selling something. So if someone's a cunt to me and does something to me that makes me hurt or something, then they, by rights, they should be hurt. They should be punished for having a go at me, And if someone does something that helps other people, then good things should happen to them as well, and they should be rewarded for what they do. And the idea in Christianity that if you're a cunt, you go to hell, and if you're good, you go to heaven. That's kind of a bit like, buying something in a shop or selling something in a shop. It's one thing for another thing. And Nietzsche thinks there's really nothing more to morality than that. It's just kind of the leftovers of the idea that you get from doing business and bartering and exchanging things, and that's all there is to it, and there's nothing abstract about it whatsoever. So that's his explanation of sort of normal ethics and morality. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because you are saying, look, he deserves this, he deserves a kicking, he deserves to go to prison, he deserves to have his cock and balls chopped off, he deserves to be given some money, he deserves a promotion, he deserves to be respected or whatever, or he deserves to be called a cunt. It's the same sort of thing as buying something or selling something, all right, or swapping something for something else. So that's all there is to that for Nietzsche. And Nietzsche thinks that really isn't that great, and that's not that brilliant. And when you're talking about what's good and what's bad, like in the world, you should really sort of say something more than just, well, it's a good swap, that it's just this for that, and that there should be something else that is what he calls beyond good and evil, which means something a bit better that we should be thinking about as being good and not good, rather than just that stuff. And for this, he's talking about the will to power, as a kind of way to have something that you appreciate that's more than that, and have a system where there are things that you think are shit and things that you think are good, and people that you think are good and people that you think are shit, which is different from this sort of swapping things thing. Anyway, so he thinks that what you have to have is that a new kind of system of right and wrong, a new system of morality, where people think that being successful and being good at stuff and being the best you can be at whatever it is you're doing, that should be what people think of as good. And sort of being a cunt and not being shit and not trying to do anything and being jealous of people because they're better than you at stuff, all that should be considered as bad. And that if we have this new system of morality, then it will be better for everybody and everything, because people will be being the best they can, and then they'll be contributing to the world better and to each other more, and that therefore there'll be loads of good stuff that's going on and people doing good things because they're better at them and they're not shit at them. And you might argue that some people don't have the same opportunities to fulfill their potential or that kind of thing, but Nietzsche doesn't really talk about that. He's just more concerned with the fact that some people think that you should just be shit, whereas he's saying that you should try to be better at stuff. So he's not talking about good in the sense of nice and that. He's talking about good in the sense of being good at something, you know, like Ronaldo is a good footballer, you know, not Mother Teresa is a good person, or you know, my little brother's a good boy because he does everything he's told. So another part of this thing is that it involves the individual. So you're individual and you're trying to be the best that you can, whatever it is that you're doing, and to be great. And what you don't want is other cunts putting you down and bringing you down and trying to keep you down. And like society quite often, and governments or people or religions or systems of thought or organizations, they sometimes they try to keep you down, don't they? And they try to stop you from being the best you can, or being successful or being good at something. And they'll tell you that you can't do it, or they'll tell you that you should just not do that because it's not good, not fair for other people or whatever. So, so like for example, the idea like in Hitler's Germany, for example, of everyone following the Führer and being sheep like to him, Nietzsche was well against that. Nietzsche hated what he called the herd mentality, and a herd is like a herd of animals. I don't know what animals are in herds, but a herd of wildebeest or a herd of cattle or a herd of sheep. And they all just follow each other, don't they? The sheep, the one walks over the cliff and the others fucking walk over the cliff following the cunt, don't they? And they don't have minds of their own and they don't do what they want to do themselves. They just follow other people. So this is another huge thing, and it fits in with everything that we've already said, is that in Christianity and also in a lot of sort of normal morality, and people just sort of follow other people and they just want to do what other people do and copy them. So, you know, somebody likes something on Facebook and you like it because they did, or you know, you're just dressing that way because somebody else dresses that way, and you're not having any individuality and you're not doing your own thing. And that's bad, because when you're just copying other people and doing what they do, you're not being yourself and doing, you're not going to be great at what it is that you're doing, you know, because you're too busy just being the sort of the boring shit of everything else and everyone else, who just a bunch of boring, miserable fucking cunts who don't do fucking nothing, and nobody's any good at anything, and they're all shit, and everything that they produce is shit, and they're all just shit. And what they say is you've got to be mediocre, you've got to be the same as us, and you've got to copy everybody else and be like a sheep. And if some cunt comes along and he says that this is this, then you have to agree that this is this. And if someone says, well, don't be, you know, doing what you're doing, then they can fuck off, because that's the herd mentality. And you should be yourself and be the Superman, which is to be better than all those other cunts and be, you know, be really great. So what Nietzsche wants is for people to be great and not just be sort of part of this sort of system of everyone being kept down and have to be the same as everyone else and do what everybody else is doing. And he doesn't want people sort of, do you know what I mean? So yeah. So anyway, so really, what Nietzsche also writes this book called writes a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is really cool. And in this book, he says God is dead, and that's one of the most famous things that Nietzsche said. A lot of people think that he means that just that you should be atheists and there is no such thing as God and that kind of thing, but that's not really what he means by God is dead. What he says is that God is dead because man has killed him. And man has killed him through Christianity and by modern morality. And what he means by that is that God sort of wanted everyone to be great, and God sort of made people to be good at stuff and to be successful, and that he sort of made a world in which people who are successful and do well in life get rewarded by being great and everything else. And what he meant is that Christianity and this idea about everyone sort of being sheep and following the rules, and the people who are poor and stuff being considered as better than the people who are successful and great, but that's shit, and that's like God being killed, because all the goodness and the greatness and all that stuff is gone away and done away with, and all we're left with is this fucking shit with cunts who are so fucking annoyed that they're so shit that they want to bring everyone else down and everything to be shit and the same. And that's what he means by God is dead and that we've killed him. So what Nietzsche hopes is that his philosophy can start this new way of thinking, so that people can start thinking about things that in this new way, where people can be great and successful and do the best they can and be awesome, and not just be sort of shit, you know. So anyway, that's Nietzsche, and I think that's all there is to say about him, really. I don't want to talk about about other things about him. He had a fucking great mustache. It was absolutely fucking brilliant. Look at that mustache. Fucking brilliant. That's one thing to make him great, if nothing else, you know, a huge mustache. A little bit about biography, I suppose. I could say it was a bit of a shame. He had syphilis, and his knob fell off, and he went crazy, and he died from syphilis, which was a bit shit. You might think that syphilis is like, if you get that, then that's because you've been shagging and stuff, but no, anyone can get syphilis. You know, you can be born with syphilis, you know, and it's not your fault necessarily if you have syphilis, but luckily now we don't really have syphilis anymore. It's been sort of dealt with by medicine and stuff. So, but back in his days, syphilis was a really bad thing, and loads of people had it, and it used to sort of fuck people over and kill them, make them go mad. And he was sort of in this in this condition where he couldn't move and do anything or say anything near the end of his life, and he was just sitting in a chair staring into fucking space. And his sister used to charge people to come around and look at him. So she was a fucking bitch, you know. Anyway, what else about Nietzsche? Well, he had all these cool phrases and things he said as part of his philosophy, and people repeat them quite often. So he said, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." So that means that when you're going through shit in life and you're suffering because, you know, things are happening, when you get through the shit and then you come out on the other side, then you're better for it and then you're stronger. That's a good one. He also says that when you're fighting against monsters, you should be careful that you don't also become a monster. And that's a great one. That sort of means when other people are being cunts and you're against them, don't become a cunt yourself. Even if you have to sort of do cuntish things to beat them, don't become a cunt yourself. He also said, when you're looking into the abyss, be careful that the abyss doesn't look back into you. So when you're sort of thinking about philosophy and stuff, and be careful that you don't make yourself sort of go crazy with thinking about stuff. Yeah, no, he's very influential in literature and stuff as well. And some people consider him to be the first of the existentialists. And existentialism is a philosophy that comes in at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And it's all about the individual and how, as an individual living in the world, how you make the best of yourself and you sort of come to terms with being yourself and how you can sort of live with yourself in the world and not feel like shit and think you're a cunt all the time. So anyway, he's part of that because he was saying about being Superman and being the best you can and all that, and will to power. That's sort of a step, you know, and it influences these other people later on, like Sartre and Heidegger and others. Anyway, so I'll stop there with Nietzsche. I think he's fucking awesome. I really do. I used to think he was a cunt when I first heard about him because this lecturer at university said he was a cunt. And he did a lecture and he was just talking about him, calling him a cunt. No. He was a left wing guy, this lecturer, and a lot of left wing people don't like Nietzsche because they think he's right wing. But I don't necessarily think he's left wing or right wing, Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche is Nietzsche. And I think that he's fucking brilliant. I don't give a shit if anyone thinks he's a cunt. I think he's fucking awesome. So there he is, Nietzsche.